continue from where my fellows finished and see what we can contribute to make the Air Force the kind of Air Force Nigeria at large want to see us do, especially in this period of the various crises and insurgency we have all over the country.
An Osun State Police Command has successfully exhumed the body of a fourth-year student of Lagos State University, Seun Oladele, who was allegedly murdered in Ikoyi, Osun State, by her boyfriend for money rituals. The State Commissioner of Police, Johnson Kokumo, led officers and men of the operation.
Both of us that we just sit, that how can he help my parents? Then he raised the suggestion, and I was low into it.
We now use pencil piece to knock her head. So I now cut the head and bread and heart and the two hand.
She was supposed to return to school a day after she left home. The mother tried persuading her to wait, but immediately she received the call, she just said she's going.
Killing of a human being is unlawful. It remains unlawful and it cannot be tolerated in any society.
Kaduna State Government has directed that all gas refill outlets located in residential areas to be shut down immediately. This is to avoid any recurrence of the last Saturday's gas explosion, which claimed lives and property at Sabon Tesha, Kaduna.
In a residential area like this, it is not acceptable to have this kind of facilities. We've already given directives that all such outlets should be shut down. We will relocate them, we'll give them land in the industrial areas where adequate precautions to prevent things like this happening.
The Code of Conduct Tribunal says it may revisit its earlier order suspending the acting Registrar General of the Corporate Affairs Commission, Obiageli Azugha Azinge. This follows an application to that effect filed by her counsel.
So we were surprised when we started reading in the media that there were some proceedings after that date, and some far-reaching orders were made, including orders suggesting that our client has been removed from office based on order of court and all the rest. So we didn't know what it was all about. We struggled to try and access the record, but it's been holiday season that was granted.
The Registrar of the Tribunal made serious efforts to serve the defendant and the counsel, but unfortunately they couldn't be served until this morning.
Chairman Nigerians in Diaspora Commissioner Abike Dabiri-Erewa says the federal government is making progress in creating an enabling environment for the diasporas to invest in Nigeria at minimal cost. She stated this during an on-the-spot assessment of some facilities in Imo State built by the diasporas.
Here, we see people doing things selflessly. So that we have a diaspora commission is number one encouragement from government, and then reaching out to them, encouraging them. If others see what people have done here in Imo State, you find a lot more people doing it. So a lot of Nigerians in diaspora say, want to do this, want to do that, but we don't have a structure. The commission is providing that.
We focus on treatment of neurological cases and also neurosurgical cases. Top on the list will be stroke, epilepsy, Parkinson's, memory disorders, headaches, disorders of different kinds.
And that's the news segment of Good Morning Nigeria. Claire and Jume will take over, but that will be after this message. Stay with us.
20 years of travel and counting. 20 years of promoting tourism in Africa and diaspora. Over 3 million kilometers traveled. Over 30 African countries visited. Explored the diaspora in 4 continents. Connected over 100,000 happy tourists to Africa. Reached over 50 million homes. Igniting smiles across Africa and beyond. As Gogi Africa turns 20, we thank you and invite you to join us in the quest for 20 must-visit destinations in partnership with the largest TV network in Africa, the NTA, Ministry of Information and Culture, Ministry of Transportation, Lagos State Government, Canon, Delta Airlines, Royal Caribbean, Tour Brokers International. You too can still be a partner. Call the numbers on your screen or info@gogeafrica.tv. Goge Africa, celebrating 2 decades of heritage, travel and tourism.
In today's world, it's tough being a woman. But thanks to So Clean, Nigeria's #1 detergent with stain magnet technology, doing washing is a whole lot faster and smarter too. Only So Clean has stain magnet technology with an advanced enzyme formula that pulls out even the toughest trapped dirt, just like powerful magnets. No wonder Nigerians love So Clean. So Clean, for a faster, brighter, cleaner wash.
Not so fast.
Look, I'm tired. I want to check out of this country for greener pastures.
Just calm down for a moment. Please sit down. Do you have a job where you're going to?
No, but someone is arranging,
Listen, Alinko. Checking out of this country without proper planning means one thing. Unimaginable begin. You know, I've been in the diaspora, but legitimately doing great things at home and abroad. As I've been saying, without the proper footing abroad, the risk is not worth it. Listen, Alinko, it's better to be home than be trapped abroad or even end up in prison.
My name's Mr. Muftau Abiodun Balogun. We started this business 4 years ago, and this is the production outlet where we do about 4,000 to 5,000 birds per day. With the closure of the border recently, we've been experiencing massive surge in demand. Our sales per day now is going to be between 15 to 20,000 birds. We needed to expand all avenues because of the multiplier effect it's creating. And the most interesting thing about this closure is that many of my farmers today are farmers we recruited recently, and they are young graduates. What the government is doing will lead us right. And I can tell you, if the government sustains this thing, sky will not even be our limit.
Thanks for rejoining us. Towards the adoption of various electronic payment options, the Central Bank of Nigeria has called on commercial banks to implement and enable pre-authorization options available to merchants. Details with Kolo Mohammed on Business News.
Good to have you along. As part of its commitment to facilitate development of Nigerian payment system and deepen the adoption of various electronic payment options available to users, the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, has identified the need for the banks to implement and enable pre-authorization and sale-completion options available to merchants.
Okay, because what happens is that with a pre-authorization deal, you actually allow the freezing, okay, or withholding of some funds into your accounts, okay, for a service that you have not, enjoyed, okay, usually, and then it's maybe at your checking points, so you're sure, the merchant or the service provider is very sure, okay, that you have funds in that account to be able to complete that transaction. So you either do it at point of checking, and it does not necessarily mean that at payment points you're forced to pay with that credit card. What it just simply ensures is that you have money for the transaction that you're about to get into. So you can apply that to whatever else that you also want to deal with.
Clearly, an enabled environment in terms of infrastructure and resources propels gainful business transaction. NTA Business News approached the National Environmental Standards and Regulations Enforcement Agency, NESRA, to find out.
NESRA has the mandate to ensure a cleaner and healthier environment for all Nigerians. So the economy can only grow, you have the enabling environment. So we also have the mandate to ensure the sustainable use of the Nigerian natural resources. So if you don't use your natural resources in a sustainable way, you can't have what to use tomorrow. So NESRA is one of the backbone agencies that are needed to ensure that we have a very strong economy.
Activities on the first day of trading on the floor in the stock market ended positively. Let's now let you see where activities placed market indices for Monday. And that's business news at this time. Many thanks for having you along. Beauty again soon.
All right, it's time for us now to take a look at what the papers are saying on their front pages, and that's newspaper review coming up right.
And our newspaper reviewer, Bayo Tiobi, is in the studio. Good morning, Bayo.
Good morning, Juma. Good morning, Claire.
Bayo, good morning. Hope
Thank
you slept well.
Yes,
Listen, we shouldn't ask how was your night.
Yes, the night is okay.
You don't,
It's just that
supposed to know since you're
you don't ask a man how was your night.
Well,
neither do you ask a woman.
no comment. Except that this morning, the cloud, the haze, I could almost not see my nose.
Oh.
Visibility is less than 150 meters. Really? Begin to wonder what will happen in the atmosphere for those flights across the country.
Flights has been cancelled. A lot of people have lost money, businesses to
And a lot of people are going home by road.
Yes.
They're traveling back from the holidays by road. So,
so it's quite dangerous.
Well, Claire. Flying.
Yes.
Take off with the Punch.
Yeah, the Punch newspaper. We begin with the Punch newspaper. You know, and the headlines in the Punch newspaper is, "We are acting on Turkey's troop deployment in Libya," says federal government. And with a rider deployment of soldiers, a sub-regional issue. That's coming from the defense headquarters. And just above the masthead, sacked REA, NBET MDs belong to cabal. That's coming from the presidency, from the federal government. You find that story on page 25. And Buhari won't impose successor. Presidency replies Bakari. That story is on page 8. Oil rises above $70 amid US-Iran's face-off. That story is on page 28. We'll be talking about that with Bayo. We will enforce tariff increase as from April. That's coming from Discourse. That story is on page 28. And the picture story there, school resumption. You see students there from different schools. We're just resuming school, all excited. It's a new year and a new beginning for some. And at the bottom plate of the Punch newspaper, 596 dead workers collecting salaries in Bauchi. That's coming from a panel set up by the state government to look into ghost workers in Bauchi State. That story is on page 42. 7 missing as bandits abduct Katsina bus passengers. You find that story on page 42. Operation Amotekun, Southwest to train OPC hunters orders. The story is on page 2. Claire?
Oh, yes, and Bayo, Governor Babagana Zulum of Borno State seems to be gaining grounds and, you know, it's becoming much more popular, recording some positives. His action is actually the lead story on the front page of the Daily Trust, and it's captioned this way: Governor nabs soldiers and police extorting travelers, passengers forced to sleep in the open. And I think I'd just like to read, you know, a paragraph or so. Governor Babagana Zulum of Borno State yesterday caught some soldiers and policemen forcing travelers who did not have the national identity card to pay 1,000 naira. Now, that was on his way to Jakana, which is a village 45 kilometers from Maiduguri, where terrorists launched an attack on Saturday. So, and you can see the picture of, you know, the governor right there. That's Governor Babagana Zulum at the Jimtilo military checkpoint along the Maiduguri-Damaturu Expressway in the state yesterday. You know, of course, to assess the alleged maltreatment of travelers.
Actually, Claire, this is the second visit. When people complained on social media and wrote him, he went there the first time. I told them it has to stop. So I think they didn't stop it, and he has to go for the second time and make it public.
Indeed, Bayo, I think we should take off on this very, you know.
Yes, unfortunately, the insurgents are gradually gaining an upper hand again. They are coming with persistent incursions Chibok village, you know Chibok village
Yes.
has also been in the news. 3 persons were allegedly killed by insurgents. Now they have a system. They don't come on their motorcycles. They park their motorcycles and come into the villages, shooting into the air, scaring people to gather food and bicycles. And the towns that have come under such attack are Michika, Madagali, and of recent too, travelers between Damaturu and Maiduguri, a distance of about 130 kilometers, had to be turned back because insurgents were on the highway. In fact, there is a report that said that 2 policemen were killed, but the commissioner of police for Borno said no, he doesn't have such information. It is true that one policeman had injury on the hand in the clash with the insurgents, but he was not killed. But the concern of Governor Zulum was that he went along the road and he found out that complaints from travelers and commuters that they are being forced to pay between 500 and 1,000 naira if you don't have the national identity card. This is part of the program of show your identity card before you pass.
It has always been like that. Even before the introduction of the show your identity card, that place, that Jimtulo checkpoint has always been hell for passengers. You know, when you're traveling from Maiduguri, you stop there for hours, them checking everything. Everybody in the bus has to come down. They check, then they keep some people aside. You can't move without your passengers. And in the night, they close the gate by 7 p.m. and people sleep out there in a dangerous environment because the terrorists can just strike at any moment. So it's just, you're just a sitting duck. In fact, waiting for it to happen.
Even in this instance, it is said that some passengers or commuters were forced to sleep on the highway. And so the governor is irked and he's saying that must stop. The danger in having some of our security, particularly the military, helping the security situation is that, unfortunately, in some places they are being compromised. Along some of the highway between Kwara, Ekiti, you find soldiers there doing their duties quite all right. At that point, you find hawkers around there.
Yes.
1 or 2 of the hawkers, either a girl or a boy, collect money from motorists on behalf of the security men there. And these are things that should be checked.
Subject to investigation.
Yes. No, it's clear. Every commuter who passes on that highway will see that.
All right, let's quickly do, because we've got quite a lot in our hands today. So we want to quickly wrap up this segment of the program. Daily Trust again has a raft of stories on the front page. It's talking about the electricity tariff not yet increased, federal government. That's by federal government. Remember yesterday we talked about it, yes. But today it is saying no, it has not been affected, and on the inside page, NERC is saying it will hold public consultations and will enforce hike in April. That's again attributed to the disco. So that story yesterday has been debunked. The electricity tariff has not yet been increased as federal government. Iran-US tensions push oil price above $70 per barrel. That's good for us because it's way above our benchmark barrel of $57 per barrel, but not good for international peace, for global peace.
It's not good for international peace.
Yes.
Where we will be benefiting from that, the heightened tension in the world is a concern for everybody because you don't forget that the world, particularly the Western world, went to war in Iraq on a falsity.
And I think yesterday, the UN Secretary General, made a pronouncement, of course, given all parties to the dispute, you understand, what he feels are the, necessary steps to take to de-escalate tension. And as we speak, I think the body of the slain Iranian general will be, committed to moderate, I think today or tomorrow. I think at the moment, I think the funeral procession is ongoing at the moment.
It's ongoing. The largest funeral procession, they say, in the world. It has never happened like that.
The procession is going on, but the tension is actually heightened.
Yes, it's heightened.
Coming back home, the development...
Let me quickly take so that you can do all at once. Presidency, Buhari won't handpick his successor. It's on page 41, again, from the Daily Trust, and there are other trending stories at the foot of the paper. 500, Jumain read this out earlier on, the dead workers on Bauchi government payroll, page 6, and again, many passengers abducted as gunmen ambushed 2 vehicles in Katsina. That's J5 vehicles with passengers. Now, major events that will shape judiciary in 2020, I think this should be advertorial. It's on page 31. So that's the outlook of the Daily Trust. You quickly want to take your own,
yes,
Jume?
we quickly want to take the editorial so that we can go. Just still talking about the Middle East and the escalating tension there. With the editorial from the Daily Trust newspaper is talking about Trump's dangerous brinkmanship in the Middle East. And I just have to read just a little.
Okay.
President Donald Trump, smarting from his recent impeachment for a serial infraction of the American Constitution, decided to order the assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, along with several others last Friday in a drone attack at the Baghdad International Airport. The reasons given by Trump and his spokesman is that the assassinated Iranian general had been responsible for planning the deaths of American citizens and was in the process of planning more of such attacks, which became necessary for his life to be terminated. Already, 3 Americans have been killed as a result of the attack in Kenya. It should be noted that President Trump acted without the knowledge and authorization of the U.S. Congress, whose Speaker Nancy Pelosi condemned him for acting in such a manner. It was clearly an action President Trump undertook in conjunction with those who arrogate to themselves the right to determine what to do in the international arena and not regardless of the laid down norms of international law.
Well, where do I start? Let me take the issue of 569 ghost workers in Bauchi State. In fact, Zamfara is prosecuting 37 persons for receiving double salaries in 2 ministries. So there is bold initiative to raid public service of ghost workers and double salaries as a phenomenon.
Is that not why we, government, intensify the IPPIS?
Yes.
So
critically, yes, at the federal government,
yes.
And we hope that maybe the state governments too will take.
This is why the subnational government should always key into federal government's initiative, to tackle corruption, yes. Not just to prosecute, but to to stem corruption
from the grassroots
at the very root.
Yeah, it's good because there are instances where you have very top senior security chief executive of agencies list members of their family on the payroll.
Even unborn children, they say it's not.
Well, talking about the Pastor Tunde Bakare, yes. He has said that President Muhammadu Buhari must take a keen interest in whoever succeeds him. And spokesperson for the president have emphasized, like the president said in July, that anybody who wants to succeed him must have to work hard on his own. However, Pastor Tunde Bakare has said that there is need to ensure that if his legacies are to be maintained, he must take a keen interest so that looters should not come and succeed him. But Femi Adesina, spokesperson for the president, said the president will leave in 2023, but he will also make sure that elections are free, fair, and credible.
And the president has said that, look, yes, he would leave. Probably, again, he will probably not handpick, but he would ensure that the electoral process, you understand, is strengthened.
Yes. And the development in Kaduna is that the gas station where the explosion happened on Saturday has now been identified by DPR that it was an illegal one. And such may not happen again because the governor has directed that all such should migrate to an industrial layout.
Bayo.
The editorial, please.
Editorial?
Yes, the editorial, I mean, we've talked about
it. The editorial is the initiative by the United States for killing General Qasem Soleimani. And President Trump says that because he's responsible for killing some Americans and also planning others. However, there are indications that because this is an election year, the President Trump is having challenges about impeachment threats on him. He needs to take initiatives that will rally Americans around him. But I don't think it will work because George Bush did it.
Initiative that is consistent with the Republicans.
Yes.
Bayo.
George Bush did it.
We have to stop here at this point. Thank you, Bayo.
Thank you so much,
Thank you
Bayo, for coming now, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Tomorrow will be another day.
Yes. Now we'll move on. We take a break right now. When we return, our discussion on political activities in 2019 and the outlook in 2020 will be in focus. We'll be right back.
They swore an oath to serve our fatherland and defend the people. They traded their freedom, comfortable homes, and mortgaged their lives on the battleground for our unity and peaceful living. These are the great, fearless, loyal, and committed Nigerian armed forces who risked their lives courageously to safeguard our borders. But in the line of duty, many never returned. Nigerians, arise, let's celebrate our fallen heroes. Put on the remembrance emblem with pride to support the incapacitated and families of our fallen heroes.
It is indeed befitting to honor the memory of the gallant hearts of young men who paid the supreme sacrifice to keep the country united.
President Muhammadu Buhari enjoins all ministries, parastatals, religious and corporate bodies to donate generously to the Emblem Appeal Launch. Send your donations to these accounts. Account name, Emblem Appeal Launch. Account number 393-200-7526. EcoBank Nigeria PLC.
Nigeria is our country, and it's the only country we have. Irrespective of religion, tribe, the heroes of our past did their best to take Nigeria to where it is today. It will be unfortunate, I repeat, unfortunate, absolutely, if we don't keep Nigeria intact. We must put our differences behind. We must let everybody know that human beings cannot live together without some differences. But at the end of the day, our country is Nigerian. It must always come first.
Get ready for the Unity Challenge reality TV show. Coming soon.
We have come to the end of another successful year, and we wish to appreciate all those that mean so much to us. Our sponsors, our clients, government at all levels, corporate bodies, advertisers, religious bodies, civil society groups, political parties, and above all, you, our esteemed viewer. Together, we made 2019 great. Together, we shall make 2020 even greater. That is why we say, thank you. This is wishing you Merry Christmas and a prosperous New Year.
Welcome back to Good Morning Nigeria. Now, Oyeyemi Ajayi has excerpts on the political outlook for 2020.
Our constitution, has given us a very good background, for us to think about ideology. An ideology that is going to give citizens food on the table, an ideology is going to provide employment, ideology that is going to reduce the concentration of wealth, in few hands, an ideology that is going to make this country great, through distribution. So I think that if we use that section, that chapter of the Constitution, and we make it justiciable, we are going to be moving forward.
We must quickly do a reform on our electoral laws. We must help INEC to perform by ensuring that we kind of break down INEC into three spaces, which is the electoral umpire, is the electoral monitoring team is able to conduct elections, and we talk about the enforcement area for INEC. Then we talk about the delineation, which I was always suggesting that we deal with it with National Population Commission and the Bureau of Statistics.
I will be in support of reforms as far as the electoral body is concerned, but let it be one that Nigerians are going to key into, even knowing what the reforms are standing for, okay? Because you can't clamor for what even the citizens don't even understand. So let the citizens be well informed first, so they know that exactly the reform is going to be to their advantage and to the advantage of the generality of Nigerians.
We need to use national orientation to begin to whip up patriotism. If we can whip up enough patriotism from now, even anybody you now give the position to as an ad hoc staff would be patriotic at the polling unit to ensure that they're not swayed one way or the other and they keep the peace.
All right, thank you very much, Oyemi. Those were the excerpts from our first part one conversation on the political outlook for 2020. And let me quickly introduce our guests here in the studio. Dr. Chris Akomas, former Deputy Governor, Abia State. We'd like to thank you very much, sir, for coming. Thank you. We also have here with us Dr. Clement Nwankwo, who is Executive Director, Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, PLAG, and of course, convener Election Situation Room. We'd like to thank you very much for finding time to join us.
Thank you. No, doctor.
All right. Okay.
Yes.
Jume.
And we also have in the studio Rinsola Abiola, Advocate for Youth Inclusion and Gender Equity. You're welcome once again.
Thank you very much
to the
for
part
having
two
me
of
once
our discussion
again.
on the yes. And joining us from our Kaduna Network Center is Professor Kabir Mato, Professor of Political Science and Commissioner for Youth and Sports, Kaduna State. You're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria. It's a pleasure to have you, and compliments of the season.
Morning. It's a pleasure having you too.
All right, let's quickly begin. Let me start with the former Deputy Governor, Dr. Chris Akamas, who also is a politician. You listen to some of the excerpts, some of the views, while also, responding to that. I'd like you to tell us what probably you consider would be the high points, political high points, that is, for you in 2019.
2020?
2019.
Okay. For 2019, as far as I'm concerned, the political high points was the successful conduct of the general elections and the off-season elections, because those were the yardstick with which we measured how successful or how well we were faring, as it has to do with our political journey and our democracy. Then the exceptional outcome of the 2020 budget, which was presented and passed within a record time. That was also an interesting one. The speed with which certain decisions or screening and the confirmation of certain positions were made, because it had its implication on our national economy, like the reappointment and the confirmation of the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, which at least reassured the economic world and the financial system that certain policies that were in place will continue. We also had, the opportunities of going through the judiciary, the way they dispensed of the cases that had to do with the elections, such that before the end of the year, 2019, most of the critical cases were decided upon, and that helped douse tensions and further sharpened our focus on what is next as we move into the year 2020. And I think that was it. Yeah, you talked about the high points. I better stick to the high points for now.
Okay, Clement, Professor Dungpam Shah, in his opening remarks when we had our first conversation, thought that in 2019 we actually retrogressed in terms of the gains that we have made politics-wise, from 1919. What are your thoughts?
Well, Professor Dungpam Shah is very experienced and very knowledgeable, and I think that with respect to where we are today, the question regarding our politics is whether we've advanced or not. Certainly, 20 years of democracy in any country is worth celebrating. The contention is the quality of it, and I think that the quality of Nigeria's democracy is what is quite a debate right now. I think for a lot of us who have been watching the development of our politics, a lot has happened, a lot has expanded, a lot of the institutions have been taxed, and I think that the expectation of every nation is to continue to make progress on the basis of as time goes on. And I think it's a question whether we've made the progress that we really want. And I think for a lot of Nigerians, it'll be a question that we probably have not made as much progress as we would like to see happen. I think that His Excellency makes the point about the elections in 2019 being a major milestone. I think, of course, it is a milestone, but the quality of that election has been a subject of debate and discussions. And I think for all of us, we would like to see an electoral process that is much more improved, that is much more able to run on its own, that people have much more confidence in. And I do not think that the 2019 elections has assured us that we are there yet. We have a long way to go, and the outlook for a lot of us looking at 2020 and beyond is that this country has to decide which way it wants to go, and I think at this stage that decision has to be in a positive direction. Where we are today is not where we expect to be. I think it's quite sad with a lot of expectations not being met, but if people can pause, if those who are in control at the states, at the national level, pause and understand that Nigerians expect a lot more, then perhaps they would understand what they need to do. But at this time, I think there's a lot of disappointment in the country.
Okay, you were the convener of the election situation room. You were on the hot seat most of the time during the election results that came out. I would like to know, and I'm sure the viewers would like to know, what was your reaction when the election was postponed?
I think we did put out a statement about the situation of things. Indeed, we did see just before the elections were to hold that things were not right. And we did point out to the Electoral Commission and to stakeholders that we were concerned about preparations for the next day. And INEC reacted and postponed the elections by a couple of days. I think it's always sad when preparations are in place and people have traveled, as happened with these last elections, to their registration areas and find out that they can't vote. I think that postponement was a major responsibility for the low turnout that you saw in that election. And a lot of people lost interest in election because when they traveled, risked their lives, spent a lot of money and found that they had to go back home, they couldn't mobilize to go back. So I think that postponing an election anytime, anywhere is usually a very big disappointment and raises questions about the credibility of the process, and should never happen in terms of planning for any event at all. But it did happen, and I think that when you put an assessment of the entire election, that postponement accounts for why you have the score on the 2019 elections, and that score is not a very high score. It's actually a low score that was given for the 2019 elections.
And guests on our program where, they were calling for the need to reform the electoral process. That's where my question actually is coming, in line with global best practices. So where do you think the reform should come from?
Well, I think that the president did not assent to the 2019 or indeed 2018 draft proposals on the excuse that it was too close to the elections, which is agreed, because if he had signed it at a point that the final draft got to him, INEC would have had to do a lot of work to be able to meet up with the implications of the amendments that were made. But again, we had pushed for this amendment long before. So if people were enthusiastic about amendments, they would have been able to finalize, sign, and INEC would have been in a position to implement. I think that the president needs to commit to looking at that draft bill and sending an executive bill to the National Assembly. I'm happy that within the National Assembly, the Deputy Senate President has a proposal which he is pursuing with Senator Kiari to have the National Assembly begin the process again. In the House of Representatives, the chairman of the Committee on Electoral Matters, Honorable Aisha Duku, is also pursuing this. And I'm sure that within the National Assembly, but if the executive, the Attorney General and Minister of Justice, the President can decide that they want to revive the 2018 draft, taking into account the experience of the 2019 elections, they can pursue it. And I think that 2020 should be the year that the president says, because I was happy the president says he wants to provide for free and fair elections. He wants to leave a good legacy on elections. Given the failings of the elections in 2019, I think the president should take the initiative, decide that this is one legacy he wants to leave behind. Every day in this country, we talk about the Ways Committee report and the recommendations made. Attributes are made to former President Yar'Adua for taking that initiative, recognizing that the election that brought him, and I think as a sign of humility, the election that brought President Yar'Adua to power, he acknowledged in truth and humility that it was not credible. But he committed to electoral reforms, and that's why you had the Ways Committee set up. That's why you had Professor Tahiru Jega appointed as chairman of INEC in 2010. That's why you had the elections held in 2011 and 2015. And our guest in Kaduna, Dr. Kabiru Mato, was with me in the work that we did to pursue some of those reforms. So it's really important that the president says, I would like to leave a legacy on electoral reform, and we would like to commend him for saying that, would like to then see him take steps to ensure that his words are matched with action.
I'd like to appeal to our other guests here. Of course, the former Deputy Governor, Dr. Chris Akoma-Srinsola, and Professor Mato. Please bear with us because we need to engage Clement. He will soon let him go just before the strike of 8. So, Clem, 2015 election was adjudged one of our best in terms of best practices. What elements or what features did you think, would you say, rubbed off of similar quality in 2019?
I think the 2015 elections saw a lot of politicians and political parties being much more conscious of the steps that INEC put in place to ensure transparency with the elections. The technology that INEC introduced, a lot of the politicians were not so very familiar with it, did not understand how to compromise it, and seemed frightened of it. And so a lot of respect of it was in place. And I think there seemed some bit more caution and discipline on the part of the political parties. But I think that after the 2015 elections, politicians conquered some of those fears, saw the loopholes, and began to think how best they can manipulate elections. And unfortunately, with 2019 elections, we also saw that the neutrality of state institutions, and I think it's really important that Nigerians understand that state institutions need to be non-partisan. The distinction between 2015 and 2019 was that state institutions in 2019 became active partners in support of political interests. And once you see that happen, an election loses credibility. That's what happened with 2019.
Let's look forward, because we have to let you go, to 2020. Mr. President has already indicated, of course, his interest not to stand up for any election, but that he would be part of strengthening the electoral process. Now we'll see a testing of the structure of the parties, across the two main parties. The structure has been tested already. We've seen the crisis in Rivers, we've seen the crisis in Edo and all that. How do you think this might impact, on 2023 elections? How do you think that the political actors will play even in 2020?
I think it's commendable that the president says, I am not running for elections. Of course, the constitution is very clear. He cannot run for elections. But I think that given that you have political charlatans running all over the place who would try to convince or even try to sell a dummy to say you can extend your term under the constitution, I think it was quite clear that he has outrightly said, don't come to me with your merchandise. And I think that's really very clear. But certainly he can't run. The constitution is very clear. I think that going forward, what the president should do is support the Electoral Commission, get electoral reform in place, and allow and indeed instruct and ensure that state institutions keep away from politics.
Should he have a hand in,
handpicking?
The candidate.
I was shocked to hear Pastor Bakare make that suggestion. I'm not quite sure the details of what he said, but certainly when you ask an incumbent to handpick a successor or find a successor, the danger in that is that you are saying to him, interfere in the process. And I don't think that any Democrat would make that kind of suggestion. The president should keep away from politics, support INEC, ensure that you have electoral reform in place, and allow for citizens. The problem with parties is lack of internal democracy. Whether it is the major party or a minor party, there is lack of internal democracy. And that's why you would see in some states where it was certain that a party in power would in fact win an election, lose the election because a governor sits in office and decides he wants his brother, he wants his in-law, he wants his cousin to succeed him in some capacity. That's not democracy. And I think that what should happen is that incumbents should not twist political parties. Let the executives of the parties, let the executives themselves also realize that they should provide a level playing field for all aspirants who want to contest office to be chosen by citizens so that you can have quality candidates. That's the only way we can strengthen our democracy.
So what do you think will be the political issue in 2020 with 2 elections coming up later in the year?
I think that given and that's where I differ with His Excellency Chris Akoma, the elections that just happened in Kogi and Bayelsa, those 2 elections are not examples to cite. I think it's quite disturbing to see elections where there's so much violence, where people are killed. A woman leader of a political party was burnt inside her house. For any country, that should be a tragedy. So it cannot be a commendation about these 2 elections. And I think that electoral reform is going to be a major issue in discussions this year. The quality of the budget that was passed, very commendable, and we must commend the National Assembly and indeed the President, that their budget was passed within the previous fiscal year to allow for a full year of implementation of the budget. That's very good. But the quality of what was passed will be a major issue as we go into 2020. The economic situation is going to be a major issue because when you look at the quality of life of Nigerians and you look at the economic outlook for 2020, if you look at all of the rating agencies, they're downgrading all aspects of Nigeria's economy. So for us in 2020, I think the economy is going to be a major issue. And I see people citing the ongoing squabbles between Iran and the US as signs that the oil prices are going to go up. As we know, this is going to be a momentary tussle, and you are going to see that even the oil prices will come down much lower than we expect.
As long as the tensions, do not escalate further.
I do not see the tensions escalating. I think, of course, it's expected that the tensions would be high for a few weeks, but certainly I do not see that this is going to be anything that escalates. You actually will see a de-escalation of the crisis.
We desperately hope so.
Clement Wanko, Executive Director, Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, PLAC in Abuja, and of course, convener of Election Situation Room. We wish we could engage you more, but we have to respect your rights to be somewhere. Thank you very much for obliging us your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, let me quickly bring in, just before you leave, let me bring in Professor Kabir Mato, Professor of Political Science, Commissioner for Youth and Sports from our Kaduna Center. To the extent that we had at least an outcome of the 2019 elections, of course, in which the APC won at the presidential election, would you say that politics in 2019 was successful, as the former deputy governor here, had evaluated?
Well, thank you very much. Again, good morning. I think it was successful to an extent. I will not expect, obviously, that after about 5 or 6 rounds of elections that Nigeria will be in a position to get a perfect electoral system in place. It's work in progress, I want to think, and with what happened in 2019, just like Clement Nwankwo mentioned, you saw a lot of, you measure sometimes the credibility of an election, not necessarily by the violent outcomes, but also by the pattern in which, elected officials are returned, where you see an incumbent government being serially defeated. In some states, we saw how one political party will take virtually every, electoral position, and at a point, the governors of that same political party will lose the election. To me, that's a measure of perhaps determining whether an electoral system is finding a place or otherwise, and it happened. And I want also to remove from our minds this idea that an election is only seen as free, fair, and credible when an incumbent is defeated. That's not necessarily the issue. As far as 2019 election is concerned, yes, you said clearly that the APC won the federal elections, but if you take it arithmetically to the lower levels, you will find that the opposition PDP, in fact, won more states as far as governorship election was concerned than the APC. And perhaps, of course, that also reflected what Clement Nwankwo referred to as the internal squabbles and, absence or the lack of inter-party democracy, which saw the emergence of some candidates that were unacceptable to the people on one hand. On the other hand, the resolution of people to decide on perhaps removing people or those representatives that they saw as not meeting up to their expectation. So if we take this permutation as a matter of reference, you will realize that, in fact, in 2019, tremendous achievements were recorded. Yes, the election was postponed. It was a national tragedy. Everybody, was saddened by that development. But just like Nwankwo said, it's very clear that perhaps those of them that were sitting right there realized the implications of having to conduct that election on the first day and the possible consequences that will come after it, and therefore advised the electoral umpire to shift it. And I think it was better that it was shifted than for it to hold and, calamity of gargantuan proportion recorded within the Nigerian political space. So 2019, as far as I'm concerned, the elections were fair, were credible. But like I said, it's work in progress. We will expect that with successive suggestions and reforms on the electoral system, the laws, the implementation. But let me make it again abundantly clear here that let us not assume that at all times the problems have to do with the law, the enabling legislations that will guide the electoral processes. The major problem as far as elections in this country is concerned, in my view, has to do with the attitude and the desperation of the political actors. And as long as this is not addressed, and I think that's what we should begin to work on between now, 2020 and 2022, up to 2023, to reduce this, excessive what you call desire on the part of politicians to get into political office or to an elected office as a matter of life and death. As long as we don't do that, the legislation, no matter how perfect it may be, is certainly not going to see us, out of these electoral desperations that always manifest themselves whenever Nigerians go to the polls. So attitude is one issue, and we keep singing about it. We can, and we have this attitude of trying to make sure that at all times we review our laws and existing, norms to suit our individual aspirations and desire, and we want them to look, the way we want them to, without necessarily looking at the very serious impact of our own resolution as individuals and groups to abide by the provisions of these laws as they are. You always try to change laws when you try them honestly and you find that they're not workable or they have certain major weaknesses. But in this case, the laws are not even being implemented to the letter. Each time we come to an election, we try to sidetrack, we try to cut corners, we try to do things that are against the law, and then after the elections, we make noise and say that the laws are not functional. We haven't even tried these laws. So I am saying that the 2019 elections, as far as I'm concerned, were free, were credible, but of course there are a lot of other issues several other people have observed, which I think as a matter of national emergency, all concerned in Nigeria must make efforts to ensure that we begin to review these things so that by the time we go to elections in Edo and the other state, this 2020 and onwards to 2023, the manner in which we make politics and election a matter of life and death is severely diminished, so that the loss of lives, the colossal damage that is often done to the electoral process is substantially reduced, and then the democratic system takes a more firmly rooted situation.
Still staying with you, Professor Kabir Matu. Talking about laws, INEC has said it will continue to perfect the electoral process until we get it right. Are we likely to see some introductions into the electoral process projecting into 20 with 2 elections coming up later in there?
Yes, of course, like I said, the INEC will continue to wish and hope and work towards, having an electoral system that is, agreeable to virtually most of the citizens within the Nigerian nation, and that is being done. But like I am saying, it's difficult to achieve that as long as the political actors and other segments of the society are not prepared to attune their minds to the fact that all this idea of getting elections right or wrongly are purely determined, not necessarily by the laws that are established or that are on ground, but by our desires as individuals, by our free will to make sure that these things are done the way they are supposed to be done. And I'm saying that, yes, it's possible. INEC has been, from 1999 up to the last election, we have seen the desperate manner in which the electoral umpire has tried to put things right. And at any time, like Clement Wonko said in 2015, immediately the smart card reader and other innovations were put in place. The political class did not really understand the technicalities of these new innovations, and therefore the possibilities of undue interference and manipulations within this process became very minimal. Now, 4 years down the line, politicians were able to develop their own counter technologies and techniques on how to deal with smart card readers, how to do so many other things, and at the end of the day, this contributed in some way in affecting the quality of the elections in 2019. So you can see that it's not about the laws that are on ground, it's not about the technologies that were put in place, it's more about the desire and attitude of the people of this country to do what they are supposed to do. And I'm insisting that as long as the critical stakeholders within the Nigerian political enterprise are not prepared to do what they are supposed to do what is right, to agree to the fact that democracy and elections are simply about the free will of expression of individual members of the community, the state, and the nation, then of course we'll continue to run around the cycle, and at the end of the day, we will do an election. Those who win will be satisfied, and those who will lose in that election will be dissatisfied, and no matter the degree of transparency that is obtained within that system. So I'm saying in 2020, what Nigerians need to do, and what the electoral umpire, as well as government and other stakeholders within the political enterprise must do, is to ensure that we talk to one another, we try to conscientize one another, to have a change of attitude, and agree to submit. Democracy is all about the subordination of the individual wills to the desires of the majority of people. So it's about subordination. And as long as we come out to contest election and we insist that what come may be, we must be declared as winners of that particular election, then of course we'll continue to face crisis, and whatever laws we have on ground will be fertile, will not be useful, and of course the system will not also get to where we are supposed to get to. So I think in 2020 we need to talk more to ourselves. We need to invest more in perhaps attitudinal transformation of the Nigerian political elite, so that at the end of the day we're able to achieve, and by the way, 2019 was just like yesterday, and we've gone 5-6 elections now. It means, therefore, that whoever you elect today and you are not satisfied with, you have the capacity to change that person in the next 4 years. And politicians must also bear in mind that it's not, a total sum game of if you don't get it this time around, so you will never get it again. So I am saying that it is attitude that will more than anything else help us transform and change our political system and our electoral processes towards what everybody will want to see.
Professor Kabir-Mato, thank you. A major problem that you have identified is that of attitude and desperation of the political class or political actors themselves. A problem also that came up for discussion when we took on this topic in the first part. Rimsola, you were here also. This was basically one of the issues raised, and okay, you weren't part of our discussion actually. You were. Yes, the part one. You were part of our discussion on the day. So, in what areas would you say our politicians have shown this desperation? And how do we begin to address it?
As Dr. Clem said when he spoke on electoral reform, he said that in 2015 there was a knowledge gap with regards to how the new technology would impact elections, and politicians didn't really know how to manipulate it just yet. We've gone from a system where ballot snatching and other outright rigging techniques won elections, and now we're in a situation where when gunmen ascend to polling units, it's to disrupt elections, to ensure that votes are reduced from opposition strongholds or areas where someone that you don't like is running. They are not disrupting votes to stuff ballots anymore, because that's not working. As our elections evolve, politicians are evolving in how they cheat the system. And, that's the one thing that I've also been wanting to say. No matter what we do, even if we get angels from heaven to write a new electoral act, for as long as our politicians don't stop trying to manipulate the system, for as long as they don't decide that winning elections is a do-or-die thing, nothing is going to change. They're only going to get more desperate. Violence stopped winning elections, and then they moved to vote buying. Now they can actually pay people to vote for them. They give them a deposit, and then after they vote, you come back when they count, you come back for your balance. So it's like they make sure that you have to vote in a certain number, because if you don't, your money won't be complete. It's like they're using everything at their disposal to ensure that they subvert the process. And it's a very scary thing, because even if we already have laws, another thing we have to say is, vote buying, for instance, is not okay according to the Electoral Act as it is. There are portions of it that speak against inducement and offering bribes. So now the question is, if that is codified in our laws already, but it's being done and politicians have been successful at it, then what is the point of that being in the law if we're not enforcing it? So that's another assignment for law enforcement. Laws are not going to act on their own. It is the duty of the legislature to make laws for the country, but enforcement is key. And for as long as we're not enforcing our laws, we're just going to be like paper tigers. People will do whatever it is that they want, knowing fully well that nothing will come of it. They will never be held to account. So we have all these law enforcement agencies. How many people have we successfully prosecuted for electoral offenses? How many high-profile politicians have been brought to book for buying votes? How many people have been prosecuted for sponsoring violence? A woman leader was murdered in Kogi after the election by God knows who. We still don't know how that happened. We don't know who was responsible. We have law enforcement agencies that should normally take this up and brief us on updates. That family deserves justice. We're crying out for women's involved, for enhanced representation of women in politics, and things like that are happening, and we're not really getting any feedback on what's happening, who has been brought to book, who was responsible for it. These are things that we cannot just allow to go on and then hold nobody to account for.
Okay, Ms. Shadrack, thank you. Dr. Akumat, she's raised quite a number of issues. She's asked the rhetorical question, how many high-profile politicians, have been prosecuted for, breaching the electoral laws? And I'm wondering, does that make the judiciary complicit?
Thank you very much, Claire. I want to first, respond. That was why I made signs and said I will respond even when he's gone. First, the question I responded to was about the high points of the election 2019. And no matter what anybody says, the elections, the fact that we went through the elections, they were conducted, there were winners and losers, and people went to the tribunals, to the courts to continue to pursue their aspirations, is a plus. Whether we got it right the way we wanted it to be is a different thing. And it was in the same 2019, at the same time, all of us, thank God I was here in this studio, I have been an advocate against any form of violence, right from the grassroots. That's what they know me with. I tell people, if you are my supporter, don't make anybody your enemy because of me. That's one. Two, do not think you are fighting for me if I did not give the word. Don't do anything that is counterproductive, because I don't want that. I don't want anybody hurt. And it's something that I give God the glory for. My people know that, and I have that freedom across party lines. Same 2019 off-season elections we are talking about. Democracy is government of the people, by the people, for the people. And in Bayelsa, majority of the people commended INEC and said the result was a reflection of the will of the people.
Indeed, INEC, the guest we had here, also commended INEC.
Good.
But you see, the problem, the issue that was raised here was the attitude of the political class.
I'm coming.
And
just give me a minute.
Yes.
Then in Kogi, we had these issues of violence and all that. And don't forget also that even in Bayelsa, before the election proper, we had issues of violence, and we discussed here in the studio, and we discussed after the elections. And I kept on saying that unless we introduce and ensure that there are consequences for actions taken by those that take the actions and those that sponsor the actions, we will continue to have these problems. We discussed the issue of thuggery and all that, and I did say why people continued to, patronize those that provide these services, even where you don't want to be part of it. So until we find a way of ensuring that people are made to pay for their actions, it will continue to be.
How do we find a way when we have institutions that are responsible?
We have that. We also looked at what are the things that provide covers and shields for these people. And if and when we have institutions that work when they want to work, and when they go to work, they give us results. That is what we have to leverage on and make them work. And it's not something we can discuss and come up with a workable framework or strategy within an hour here. But these are things a lot of us and people have been thinking about and discussing outside. Let me say this. 2019 elections, people should really be considerate and reasonable about it. How many in this country, we were in this country, a ruling party with the president sitting up there, having won his re-election, losing states, even in some cases with margin of only 143 votes for somebody to take the governorship from them. A ruling in this country, it's not yet Uhuru, like I've always said. It's work in progress. Even America, where we borrowed this from, the United States of America, after over 200 years, they are still struggling. People, human beings are like that, and we're talking of power. People will always, and then the major problem is patriotism. Lack of patriotism across board. That was why I said that coming to answer your questions, everybody, the political class, the politicians, do they work alone? They don't work alone. The technology experts and all that come up with the suggestions and they bring proposals on how to cut corners and be, they may not be politicians. The judiciary adjudicate on what comes to them. For them is the facts before the court. What you present to them is what they look at. They cannot go outside the facts. So if you present something to them that is outside the law, and they will stick to the law. So the National Assembly continues to make law, and we continue to, reform. Good thing, and very importantly, Mr. President said, I will leave a legacy of credible election. Not just reform. We have been reforming and will continue to reform. We reform based on experiences. Like she said, it's no longer a question of snatch ballot boxes, go and stuff box somewhere. I said it here that when the law was introduced of cancelling elections where there were violence, the aim was to deter that. But then people found a better way of using that to deny people the votes that should come from their stronghold, the popular district. And the question is, how do we now handle that? Of course, there are answers, and it will be part of the thing. And at one point here, I said, when it is time, we should begin to write in, make suggestions to the legislators. We should also be ready to appear during the public hearings, and we should follow through to make sure that things happen. Attitudinal change, patriotism is key. Who are the people? If somebody comes to bribe you or to buy your vote and you refuse, what would you do? Everybody is involved here. Politicians. What do we mean? We are all involved. The politicians, the electorate, and the experts, those that conduct elections. You said it. Bring an angel. Unless the people change, somebody will not vote. Someone you have been helping pay hospital bills, pay rent. On election date, we tell you that one is before. Bring. If you don't, they won't vote for you. Even when they say they will vote, except where there is that great commitment. Even when they will say they will vote, they get there. Somebody gives them something. They check, do I have something? Let me collect this. And when they collect, they will make sure that they do the right thing. And that is another aspect, because some people collect with the intention of just collecting and voting their conscience. But when they now discover, like she said, they pay advance and wait for you somewhere. They say, okay, let me. So there are issues. Reform, we must continue to work on it across board. But let us first accept that we are all, involved in this, and we should reinvent ourselves. We should reorientate ourselves. Attitudinal change is key, and that change management must come. In a program, I did say another for that, INEC is already working with the NGOs, the faith-based organizations, and all the others, that this should be part of what we should do going forward. Okay, 2020, what are the issues? Crisis within the parties. Why the crisis? It's because of internal democracy within the parties. And that is what snowballs into what we get out there during the main elections. And I say those that on their first term should focus on the deliverables now that will be impactful if they want to make meaning, if they want people to appreciate them going forward. At least they have up to 2 years to do solid work before they go into politicking activity. Those that are on their second term should know that very soon they will leave and they have to do something that the people will see and say, indeed, this man was here or she was here. When the person was here, this was this. I tell you, like it or not, everybody that occupies a position has a say and input in who succeeds him or her.
Okay.
But does that person have holistic say and control? Should that be the case? No. But should the person have a contribution? Yes. Even in our various organizations, we do ask those that are...
So with regards to the issue, the call on the president to have a hand, what's your take on that?
To have a hand is he should also be. Yeah, so, my brother Clement said president should no longer be involved in politics. And what is he doing there? He's the leader of a party. You say he shouldn't be involved in politics? He's leading the country, and we are talking of politics. You want him to engage in political reform that he has promised the people, and you say he shouldn't be involved in politics? How would he then do it? He'll be involved, but what type of involvement are we talking about, and what are we looking at? He should make his contributions. He should steer the things objectively and not, twist or coerce the people to do that which will not be for the public good. Once the focus is on public good, for the generality of the people, the right decisions, the right things will be done. Okay. And the recommendations can be made. But should they come and pick and say, Chris Akomas, you are just a person? No.
Okay.
Should they contribute? Yes.
Okay, thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you,
Akomas.
Dr. Akomas. You've talked so much. You were nodding your head while he was talking about attitudinal change. And let me ask you a question. How has the 2019 election defined the future of politics in Nigeria? You are the future. Where do you see it taking us?
I would want to reiterate a couple of things that have already been said. First, I'm from the Southwest. Take Oyo, for instance. It's a state that the governing APC lost to PDP. I think during the presidential election, the margin was quite close. Take Osun, the presidential election, the margin was just about 3,000 votes. Zamfara, for instance, the courts, I think, restored or put the PDP in power because there were issues with how APC candidates emerged. And I think for me, internal democracy is a huge problem with political parties. But then we've seen cases like in Rivers, for instance, where the APC could not field candidates, in Zamfara, where the court said because due process was not followed. These are hard lessons that political parties have had to learn. And I am very hopeful that as going by the precedence that has been established, it's a risk that nobody will be willing to take in 2023. Subverting processes is totally and completely antithetical to everything that our democracy stands for. So if we have learned those hard lessons along the way, then I am very hopeful that come 2023, due process will be followed in how candidates emerge, just to be sure that we won't get to court again and then have people put in office simply because due process was not followed based on how candidates emerged previously. From 1999 till now, as I said earlier, there was a time in our history when people were reluctant to come out to vote because they were afraid of violence. The violence may have reduced in certain parts of the country, but then we have a new challenge that is vote buying, and it's about weaponizing the poverty of our people. It's like people have been impoverished, and then people who want to lord over them decide to use this as a weapon to get their vote. And it's not something that is happening everywhere yet, and I'm really hoping it won't get everywhere. But one thing is this. actions must have consequences. And people who engage in this underhand tactics need to be held to account to be sure that it will not continue. Because if we cannot have a credible system, if people are buying elections, the danger of this is that when they get into office, they do not see delivering on their promises as a priority. They will just believe that at any point in time, they can always come with bags of money to the electorate and secure another victory. So I'm actually very, very glad that Mr. President has said that credible elections are something that he would like to be the hallmark of his administration. But a key aspect of that is not even what is in the law. It is how the law is enforced. The Electoral Act as it is, if properly enforced, will deter people from violating it. And it is the enforcement that I believe that we need to focus on. Law enforcement agencies should not need to be told to swing into action before we see results. They should know that by virtue of their constitutional mandate to enforce our laws and hold people to account, investigate infractions, they should know what to do without being prompted. And that is where I think that we are, and that is what I think that we need to work on.
What would you think will be the future, politically wise now, of Nigerian youths? Because 2019 opened the space wider for youth participation.
In 2019, prior to the 2019 election, we did a commendable campaign regarding lowering the age of eligibility. And based on this, a lot of young people were able to come forward, even those who did not need the amendment to run. But it's something that really galvanized Nigerian youth, really got us out in our numbers. A lot of people were vying for office. Others were, some were not successful at the primaries. Some had issues with their parties, but the point, a lot of us came forward, and some did win. In Lagos, we have young legislators. In Ogun, in Oyo now, the speaker is actually a really young man. He's above 30, of course, but the Not Too Young to Run Act really did get a lot of young people to, show more interest in our politics. And I'm very hopeful that going forward, we're going to have more young people stepping up to the plate. However, there are challenges. The major parties, it's a bit expensive to participate, and it's not even just the major parties. Politics everywhere is expensive. Campaigning is terribly expensive. So you need to have a really good network. Either you're from money, or you have money, or you know people who have money, or there are people who have money. Money will always play a role. I'm a very pragmatic person, and I will tell you up front, based on the experience I've had and from talking with my friends, you want to talk to this kind of meeting, just this kind of meeting. You want to call people to talk to them, you have to drop something. You want to inform people of your intention to run, you have to drop something. What you spend on the campaign, the actual campaign expense is not what takes the bulk of your money. It is the engagements, the meetings, talking to people. If you go to meet people, you give them transport fare. Like, you are the one going to meet them, but you give them money for transport. Like, it is that serious. Refreshments. Nobody wants to listen to you until you bring money. So that's a very big challenge with our politics. And one thing that I really want to speak on is women's involvement. The statistics regarding women's involvement have not been encouraging. 1999 was dismal, accepted. We were just coming into democracy. But 2019 now, as at the last assembly, we had about 22 women in the House of Reps, and I think 7 women senators or so. And now we have half that number in the 9th Assembly. It's like we take one step forward and we take 2 backwards. The Senate, I think the number has remained constant. I think Senator Abiodun Olujimi was reinstated by the court, so the number has remained constant. This isn't where we should be. We should be making progress. We should be going forward. Nigeria does not lack qualified women. Nigeria does not lack intelligent women. Our women... These are 2 great women in front of me doing very good in the media space. And there are lots of women doing awesome jobs elsewhere. So we shouldn't still be having a problem with getting women to vie for elective office. Our political parties...
Is it a system problem? Is it a system problem?
Where does the problem lie? Is it with the women or the...
I'm getting there. I think INEC has a job to do. INEC has a gender policy that needs to be implemented. Also, our political parties, they always talk about how they want women to be represented, but nobody is really putting their money where their mouth is. You cannot simply talk about it if you're not willing to implement and enact policies that will make that happen. You cannot simply wish women's representation into being. You have to take deliberate steps towards it. We talk about affirmative action. We make examples with nations like Rwanda having more women in parliament. We talk about Uganda. We can make reference to Finland, to the Scandinavian countries. But the point is, they took deliberate steps towards doing this. They weren't just talking about it. We cannot just imagine it into happening. We have to say, okay, for every number of candidates this certain number of tickets will go to women. Unless we are deliberate about it, nothing is going to change. And that is what we need to work on.
Thank you. Professor Mato, we'll get back to you to, of course, to hear your own opinion about the issue on ground that Rinsona has raised just after this break.
My name is Giato Adeza Adams, the General Manager, Corporate and Strategic Communications, Nigerian Port Authority. As regards the land borders closure, available statistical data from APMT, which is one of our terminal operators that is involved in container handling terminal, has recorded an increase of 200 TEUs of cargoes into their terminal as a result of cargo diversion from the vessels originally meant for neighboring countries. That shows you that the terminal operators is going to have an increase in revenue, which is accrued to the terminal, and at the same time, Nigerian Port Authority will equally benefit from the revenue increase. So that is the benefit we have derived from the border closure.
To dey disobey traffic law, they cause accidents. Me, I don't talk, say I no go dey do am again because change begins with me.
I will no longer endanger my life crossing the express. Instead, I will use the bridge because change begins with me.
Oga driver, stop this bus now, won't come down. I be one carry me pass where they go.
Make I dey stop anyhow for road, they cause traffic wahala and accidents. So I go dey stop for the right bus stop because change begins with me.
Change begins with me.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Yeah, okay, and now we'll be going to Kaduna where Professor Kabiru Mato is waiting. Professor, we've been talking about women participation in politics and how it rolled out in 2019. Can we have your take on women in politics not being encouraged to go for elective positions?
Thank you very much. You see, this is one of the negative turnouts of Western liberal democracy of one man, one vote, and the inalienable right of voters to elect whosoever they desire. Maybe, as the guest in the studio there did rightly mention, for you to have participation of women, more women participating in electoral politics, I think it has to go deliberate. And that's one of the recommendations of the Justice Owais panel, talking about proportional representation, which hasn't unfortunately seen the light of the day. But if you allow it to go the way it is going, it's unlikely that we will witness very serious transformation. But there is a lesson I think that the rest of Nigeria needs to learn from Kaduna. As it is today, in Kaduna State government, the ratio between women and youth, I think, constitutes more than 70% of the state government. In Kaduna, for instance, we were elected the two youngest, legislators into the House of Representatives, one at the age of 30, one at the age of 30, the other one at the age of 31. And if you see the cabinet of Kaduna State government today, out of about 14, 15 commissioners, you have about 7, that are female. That's apart from the deputy governor, apart from numerous special advisors and other, sensitive, what you call sensitive government positions. Now, this is a deliberate action coming on the part of, the state government to ensure that encouragement of women, and youth in governance is, put in perspective. That's what I mean by it has to be deliberate. It's not likely that we will achieve what, we want to achieve, the so-called 30% affirmative action of, having women in politics without really the political leadership inserting these deliberate, actions so that you create not just awareness but activities within the youth and the women folk for greater participation in politics. One of the challenges that leadership faces in this country today has been the inability of the older generation trickle down power, devolving powers and responsibilities to those who are emerging. And if care is not taken, and I think that's what informs the way and manner the governor of Kaduna State is handling activities now. You have people under 35 years manning very critical government institutions as commissioners, as managing directors. A chairman of the Internal Revenue Service in Kaduna State is, for God's sake, about 32, 33 years. And Kaduna State has never generated so much revenue as it has, in the last 6-7 months that this young man has taken over, as the chairman of that agency. So it tells you that one of the greatest weaknesses of governance in this country has been the inability of those who should deliberately encourage and bring up young people and women folk into participation in the realm of governance. I don't see it as too obviously critical, given the very cumbersome nature of our electoral system and electoral politics, to have so many women contest elections. The rigor is actually, too unbearable, unless, of course, like I said, the Constitution is deliberately altered to create spaces, for women representation in the parliament. But young people, especially young boys, are moving in, and they are really, tormenting the older generation in this, and I think that's what needs to be done in order to have what you can call a reproduction of leadership within the Nigerian political space. Otherwise, nobody gives you power. Power is so delicate. Dr. Okoma will tell you, it's not taken on a platter of gold. It's a lot of struggle. It's a matter of life and death. Yes, of course, like I said, we know very clearly, those of us in the political science area, that politics is war without bloodshed. And of course, what makes it ugly in our scenario is that we bring in the blood. It becomes a bloodbath, but ordinarily, nobody gives you power on a platter of gold. So women participation, as far as electoral politics is concerned, in 2019 was not encouraging. That I like to see, of course, even within the federal cabinet, you see a lot of women, much more than they were appointed in 2015. Such deliberate activities, in my view, must form the fulcrum of encouraging more women participate in electoral politics by perhaps reviewing the Constitution to insert this issue of proportional representation, as you have in Rwanda, as you have in Uganda and other places, where such encouragements are taking place. Again, as I said, it's not very encouraging so far, but it has to be deliberate. If we need to see any positive movement upward as far as participation of women, not just in politics, but also in governance, it must be a deliberate creation of the political leadership, of those who find themselves in political authority, just like we have in Kaduna State today.
Thank you, Professor Mato, for your comments. You've talked about the need of course, power is not, taken on a platter of gold. With regards to gender, and gender, I mean female inclusion in politics, you have said that there should be a deliberate review of the Constitution to make for proportional representation. Dr. Kamas, when it comes to issue of gender inclusion, female, gender inclusion in politics, it's quite an interesting debate. In the past, it used to be thought that women aren't, agreed on the strategy, but it seems that they're gradually, coming to a convergence of strategy. Is that part of the reforms you expect to see in 2020?
The reforms, like I said, will continue. The process of inclusion is what is the issue as far as I'm concerned. And she asked a question. You asked a question somehow about, women inclusion and what could be done and other. And I said there are two issues where women are not, yes, proportional representation as recommended by the West Committee is very important. In the past, political parties have had to allow women pick up nomination forms free. That's one. During this last one, some are, where the charges were so high, but some made it 50%. Yes. But the issue is not even picking up the nomination forms or being given the ticket, the candidacy of the party. It's the general election, and she summarized it. Consultations, meetings before the campaign proper involves money. And this is not...
Which men don't have.
Oh, well, the issue here, and that is what I want to say, and that was why I said that some part of the problem has to do with the women. If you are going for power, you must be willing and ready to take the risk. Part of that risk is to spend their money. Some women are even more are richer than some men that run. Some of them, some very few.
Is it a system that makes them cautious, knowing that even if they spend this money, they might not get the position?
Let him learn. I want to hear what he
Let me. I know that this is a tricky one, especially when I'm here in the studio, up against it, right? Yes. But the truth must be told. Women, do you really love yourselves?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes,
when you do the talk,
I just said that women are gradually coming at a convergence.
Exactly. That is why I'm saying this. When you do the talk, you must walk the talk. Women gather, they say things, but they prefer to do the other when it's time for action. Probably the other is that somehow women believe, we are always taking good care of you women. So they believe that if we vote the man, he will take care and respond better to our request. I am being real here.
When you say proportional representation, constitutional-wise, what does it mean? What does it spell out?
Now, I wouldn't give details of that, but when we say proportional representation, it means certain number of women must be there. That, I said, apart from that, that is what we are clamoring for, that it should be introduced, it should form part of the laws, and we should go ahead and implement the process. But the situation as it is today, if there is an election and the woman is out there, women will accompany the woman everywhere. They will sing and dance and make her feel that she's... When it's time, what do they do?
Okay, let's answer
that's the question. Briefly, that is key. And she summarized it by saying you have to spend money, you have to do politics, power politics, anywhere. It's not cheap.
Rinsala, answer that question briefly before we move on.
The first thing, Nigeria is a signatory to the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. It recommends 35% affirmative action for women. Yes. The fact that we don't have up to 35% affirmative action for women in appointive and elective positions directly contravenes that particular convention. Also, on why women don't support women, the first thing I would want to correct is when people say women don't like women. I have been in politics, maybe not for so long, but when there are political assassinations, it's mostly men running after each other's lives. Nobody says because of that men are their greatest enemies or that men don't like men. That is the truth. So I think we need to correct that narrative. Also, if we really want to do something about the fact that women don't get enough votes, it's very simple. We know the parties that are more likely to win. Give us a certain percentage of tickets. See, once you've done that, the ticket, winning the primaries is the most difficult part of your election. Yes. A lot of people who want to support you will not donate a kobo to your campaign until you have won your primaries. Getting that ticket is the most important thing, is the most vital thing. And once we're able to push women to that point, then we can get the resources that they need to do the rest of the campaign.
Okay, let's move away from the issue of women. We've said enough, and I know that everybody... we have our tweets now. Let's quickly take our tweets before we bring it.
Move on.
Ibrahim Modu Aji tweets, Edo and Ondo elections in focus. Engaging stakeholders, especially the political parties, and signing peace accord isn't enough to ensure violence-free elections. Now, there's need for massive awareness campaign on the need for youths not to allow themselves to be used by politicians.
And Bashiru tweets, overall, we expect political outlook for 2020 to be relatively stable and positive, as major indicators of political risk and instability, such as national elections absent in 2020, insecurity, insurgency, kidnapping, etc., on the decline, and governance reforms slowly yielding results.
Chidi Amadi, we cannot continue to do the same do things the same way and expect a different result. True, especially INEC needs urgent improvement. Card reader and other issues observed during the just concluded election, and even more registration. They lead some political parties, he says.
And Akeju Olagbaju tweets, the year 2020 has no major election but political rearrangement towards the end of year to consolidate new political ideologies against 2023. It is important for our political actors to maintain relative peace in 2020 to stabilize the country and protect democracy.
All right, Mike, tweets, we need all-inclusive governance for the year 2020, while we also cherish constructive and viable oppositions at different levels of government. We may belong to different political parties, but Nigeria is bigger than everyone, so we must always think on how to move the country forward.
And Dele Jack Solomon tweets, we hope despite the challenges, including insecurity and sluggish economic growth, that this year offers an opportunity for the nation's leaders to raise hope by recommitting to tackling the ranging challenges inhibiting the country from achieving its great potential.
Amogbalaho Babs, the political ambience will be devoid of apprehension except for the Edo and Ondo state elections. Even at that, the tension isn't expected to be as rife as that of Kogi and Bayelsa states held in 2019. Whatever it is, there is a positive sign of political stability.
Idogisit William tweets, it's my earnest prayer that 2020 will bring fresh air to Nigerian political scene where judiciary, legislature, and the executive will be dependent, devoid of any form of interference.
Luba Shima Jacobs, 2020 will be a year for us, especially the much expected infrastructure for this year will reshape politicians' mindset, and as will make citizens know what or whom in which office is supposed to do, and also hold them responsible. Hopefully, the 23 billion dollar loan will be granted this year.
And Dele Jack Solomon tweets again, with the recent increase in the price of crude oil, it is conspicuous that crude oil will play a dominant role in shaping the direction of the Nigerian economy in 2020. Nigerians would like to see tape agenda that will drive innovations that will raise oil revenue in the country.
And Steve Bond 007, for 2020, the citizens hope that the elections won't be disrupted by thugs and vote buying. For 2020, the citizens hope the judiciary will work well this time around.
And
Jones Ferrari.
Jones Ferrari, 2020 will be better a year because the way I'm saying things, President Muhammadu Buhari has already set the pace for Nigerians. We just need to do our part. The country is growing day by day and the economy is reviving. Don't forget to consume made in Nigerian goods.
And Abubakar Mohammed is optimistic that 2020 will be better than all other years, God willing. Tweets too, we also have Sani Michael Omakoji. If we are really serious as Giant of Africa, we claim electronic voting must be signed into law immediately without further politicking. Our PVC should be linked to BVN and NIMC to enable us vote with the aid of ATM, POS, apps, and other devices. This will eradicate thuggery.
Chris Simon tweets, despite the bottlenecks we had encountered in previous years as individuals and as a nation, I am so optimistic year 2020 is going to be better in every aspect of our endeavors. Let's do the right thing at the right time and expect good results.
And Mulima Idi Mato, autonomy for local government administration is very important for peace and progress of the country, and democracy at that level is paramount as well.
And Mohammed Al-Hassan tweets, majority of politicians in Nigeria see politics as business, where they invest and are desperate to get profits.
Let's get our final thoughts now. Let's go to Kaduna. Professor Idi Mato, quickly, some of the attitude and desperation you talked about, Kabiri Mato, I beg your pardon, you talked about. I'd just like to mention the issue of cross-carpeting, which was rife in 2019. Rinsala here also cross-carpeted at a time. So some people cross-carpet. Of course, it has been there since the early 1950s, and even from the First Republic, Second and Third Republic, we've seen a lot of cross-carpeting. But the frequency and reason for cross-carpeting in 2019, some people say was antithetical to democracy. How do we do away with such political jumping in this dispensation?
Thank you very much. The concept of cross-carpeting, after all, is a feature that you find in parliamentary systems of government. It's not an attribute in the presidential system of government. Nigerian constitution is very categorical about people moving from one political party to the other. The restriction is more on those who are elected, especially into state or national parliament. As a member of the Senate or House of Representatives, we have seen some landmark rulings from the Supreme Court where people jumping from one political party to the other, and therefore their seats declared vacant. So it's not partial, but within the executive realm of government, governors and presidents appear to have the liberty to move from one political party to the other without any sanction prescribed by the Constitution. But for those in the legislature, I think the Constitution is very clear about it. Politicians always try to hide under, the amorphous provision that says as long as there is crisis within the leadership of that political party. I think it was the Supreme Court that finally defined the crisis to mean crisis at the national level, not crisis, within the local level. And so that's why, for instance, when people like Bukola Saraki were trying to move away from APC to the PDP just before the last election in 2019, a new APC was created so that it satisfies the provision of the Constitution that there is crisis at the center. Before, and that was not the first time. It happened also when they were leaving PDP to the APC just before the 2014-2015 election. So within presidential democracy, the idea of cross-carpeting is not always there. It's not there. It's simply changing political party, and it is very specific that when you leave your political party, if you are elected into a parliament and you go to another political party, your seat is declared vacant. For governors, for those in executive positions, the Constitution is kinder with them. In 2019, it did happen, but of course, as a fledgling system, as a democracy that is just evolving, you will expect that this kind of things will continue to happen. We're not yet there. We will have to perhaps practice presidential democracy for 50 or 60 years before we could beat our chest to say we are getting somewhere or we're getting matured in it. But as far as, the system is concerned today, I think we're not doing too badly because it's not an exploratory study. It is a study that is in progress. We have seen other climes, we've seen other systems practicing the presidential system of government, and as such, we are not going through the nitty-gritties of the details, of trying to come to terms with the reality of how a presidential system of government operates. So I think we will continue to see this idea of defections. It's more or less called defection rather than carpet crossing under presidential system of government. As a free citizen of this country that has a right to vote and be voted for, but I'm not voted for, I am free to move from my loyalty from one political party to the other. But to those who are elected, especially into the parliament, such rights are grossly, constrained by the Constitution, unless, of course, certain conditions are fulfilled. So I am expecting that we will continue to see this crisis rear its ugly head, but it's not likely going to happen soon. It's always a crisis that, surfaces when elections about to come, when you sit in parliament and you suspect or you see that you are not in good terms either with your state governor, some powerful political forces within your constituency, and the possibilities of you gaining that seat through that same political party is diminished. What you do is then you begin to create avenues of defecting from that political party to the other.
All right, Professor Kabir Mato, Professor of Political Science and Commissioner for Youth and Sports, Kaduna State. We'd like to appreciate you this morning for joining us on the program. And that also appreciate Rinsola Abiola, Advocate for Youth Inclusion and Gender Equity. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And our friend and our dear brother, Dr. Chris Akomas, former Deputy Governor, Abia State. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Well, Sports Update is next.